About 15 minutes to conclude, which means that our discussion will be a little brief, but we can start the conversations and hope that people will stay in contact with each other. And in the spirit of the Foucauldian ethos that we're all supposed to be learning and taking up, I will submit myself vulnerably to doing a few closing remarks. And this is a brief attempt to try to synthesize some of the central questions. We have a lot of concepts on the table. We have a lot of historical moments. We have a lot of disciplines. We basically have coverage for 2,400 years and critiques not only of what Foucault is not able to do and how limited his own episteme was 40 years ago, but we also see the challenges that he himself was bringing, right? We see how he's actually informing history and making it less positivist than it thinks, right? We see how he's informing psychoanalysis and making us participate in new erotology. And so Foucault is offering us all these resources, even today, even given the kind of limitations that, that so many have articulated here in this conference. What we do know is that the Foucault, who's the nihilist, Foucault, the woke philosopher king, Foucault, who is, the Islamo-fascista, this Foucault has nothing to do with Foucault, right? These are the idols. These are the idols that have been constructed for certain kinds of capitalist ends, certain kinds of cultural movements and forms. Everyone needs a fall guy, and who better than Foucault, the man who put himself on the line, the man who brought people together, the man who saw people for who they were, beyond norms, beyond binaries, and challenged himself, as Lynn showed us, to think differently, to do differently through his students, right? He's out there learning in 1967 and 1968 through his students in Tunis what revolution might look like, not in terms of what you say, but what you do. And so Philippe, when you were invoking Daniel Defer, not what should I say when my love has died, but what should I do? And I think for us today, this is the third question. I'm going to go in reverse order. The question for us all is, what should we do? I started this conference by saying that it's a great privilege to be here. There's a lot of reckoning happening. There are so many different ways in which, as Nancy was saying, a wonderful student in our program, we can show up, we can be activists, we can join, we can learn. As Federico was showing us through the example of Foucault and Canguilhem, there's this imperative to cultivate an art of listening. And so when it comes to this question, what should we do? This is attendant to a second question, which is, what is it to be a philosopher? And what for Foucault was it to be a philosopher? This is not about abstractions. This is not about transcendental realities. This is not about metaphysics and the totalizing nature of all things in time. This is not about being right, right? In fact, it's about not being right, recognizing that there is no right, and that the way in which we're engaging in this practice is in itself the art of living, and doing that together, doing that in a way that recognizes how we are shaped in these forms, in these constraints, how people are differentially subject to violence, how the logics of white supremacy are not only encoded in every level of our public structures and systems, as Foucault has long diagnosed, and as Philippe Szabó is showing us through the particular question of public health, the question of who gets to live, who gets access to health. In the United States, this is a huge crisis. And we have the new Jim Crow in terms of thinking about the way in which slavery lives on through mass incarceration. But if we think about public health as a crisis, especially for Black women, the ways in which marginalized populations, indigenous populations, people who are not seen because they don't fit into the Western episteme, right? They don't fit into the logic. And if they do, it's because they've been subject, they've been erased, they've been reduced to less than. And so how then do we think with Pico and the way in which he's talking about Sojourner Truth, who had no choice, right? What is it to live with agency when you have no choice? Because so many of your options have been stripped away. You are stripped yourself to your flesh. And what do you do then? She still fought. And not only did she still fight, she kept doing it and inspired others. We had this conversation a few weeks ago, but I was saying, it's remarkable we have these stories on the one hand, but how many Sojourner Truths are there out there who didn't have their stories told, who walked off and were murdered, How many people who, in Barbados, for example, like the landing pad in the transatlantic slave trade, people were brought over, people were enslaved, people were taken from Africa, brought to the Caribbean. There was a 2 to 5 year lifetime for the most part. These people were not entitled to health. They were not entitled to well-being. They were not entitled to being seen as human. And that is what we're talking about when we're thinking about what is so wrong with the logic of liberal humanism. What is so wrong with, as Federico was saying at the beginning, the way in which we kind of rest our selves thinking that we have human rights. We think that we have these liberal ideas. We think that we have healthcare, not for all. But the reality is that these are structuring logics which exclude. And so that counter enlightenment, that other form of critique that you articulated, Frederic, the way in which critique can also be Nietzschean, it can also be a riposte to the idolization of reason as ordering things. Instead, it opens up critique as a constant site of challenge, as a constant site of thinking, feeling, acting differently. And you can't do that alone. Nietzsche was not alone even. Even when he's lambasting other people, he's doing it with vigor. And as Ariane was pointing out in terms of the 2 forms of light, the light that guides, right, la lumière, the light of reason. We need that. We need human rights, aspirationally at least. We need public health. But we also need to see its dangers. We need to see its dangers in order to not convince ourselves that we are doing the right thing, knowing that there is no right that we have ever actualized. There has only been histories of violence, but there have also been histories of care. And sometimes that care comes from being able to see the dazzling light of Dionysius, to being open to being changed through the light that dazzles, the light that doesn't make any sense, the light that blinds, but also the light that illuminates a different way of thinking and being. And so the question that, that was first question, what is critique basically? So we worked through our 3 questions, but the way that I think these papers, all of the papers are bringing together this question, obviously, of thinking beyond binaries. Obviously, this is what Foucault is up to. He's obviously working in this genealogical tradition of critique as a possible site of possibility for philosophy, certainly, as Orazio was beautifully articulating yesterday. But it's also that challenge that Foucault himself is taking up, not as an abstract philosopher, but as instead a human being who was told he was abnormal, a human being who thought, and a human being who cared deeply about others. I think personally, this is not scientific, as Philippe said, but I think personally, this is because Foucault knew what it was to be marginalized. He knew what it was to feel abnormal. He knew what it felt like to be excluded while still being a part of the fold. And he figured, how is this conformity a life? He himself opened up these possibilities. And in doing that, he himself becomes a kind of philosopher that Judith Clavel, as you were talking about, the situatedness of the philosopher, the epistemic ways in which the philosopher has to be seen as internal to their context, as speaking to a particular site, speaking to particular issues. And with Foucault, he is not only so aware of doing this himself, but he has given us the tools to be able to do it ourselves today. This is a call for my buddies across the hall in philosophy. I'm courtesy faculty in philosophy department, so I love them. But analytic philosophy in the United States has a lot of problems because of that resistance to thinking about situatedness, to that resistance to thinking about the Dionysian light that dazzles, the ways in which cultures and contexts and hierarchy and tyranny affects people. And if we don't recognize these realities, we can't change them. And so when it comes to the question, what should we do? It's very important because it's not what should I do? I, as Federico was saying, can listen. We can take up these aptitudes, these practices, these academic practices that are not the norm, right, Lynn, as you constantly show in your work, constantly transforming what it means to do philosophy, to do work theory. What is it that we take ourselves to be doing as humanists, as theorists, as thinkers? Because we're also feelers, right? We're doers. We are all here because we love Michel Foucault. Right? We can hate him also, but there is something that is deeply effective and binding. Like my grad student showing up Like they're doing this because, I don't know, for like they all love each other. We created this amazing community this year. They have just become this site of possibility for an academic life that I didn't think was possible. And this is not with the expectation that they can actually get like all the academic jobs, because there aren't any. So we're undertaking this practice together. I think you all will, but we're undertaking this practice as an ethical practice. It's not a professional pursuit. We're all taking this practice out because we're inspired by something and we're horrified by the way that people are treated. We're horrified by these histories of mass incarceration and genocide and slaughter. And so what do? We have to do it together. We have to learn how to not only listen in the way that we can think about the Parisiist, the courage of truth. We have to listen to Sojourner Truth. We can even learn how to listen to Socrates. We can learn how to listen to Diogenes. We can learn how to listen to each and every one of our speakers. And so this is that second fold of Parisia, which is the courage to truth. Right? This is the courage to say, to think, to live differently. And by doing that, we are taking up these norms and transvaluing them. We are challenging what it looks like to be a subject in the world. And so there are the truth tellers, speaking truth to power, and we have to learn how to cultivate the aptitude to listen, to hold attention, to have time, to have space to think about what speculative futures, right, as Daniel was talking about, might be possible. And so it's a different kind of temporality, a different way we have to learn how to sit together. This is the first part of Parisia. Learn to listen so that we can actually hear the Parisiist, see them. And on the other hand, right, in 1980, Foucault actually was drafting his first notes on Parisia. He wouldn't even talk about it until 1982 publicly. But this is the Parisia, which is the opening of the heart, l'ouverture du cœur. And this is the Parisia that he's thinking about directly in terms of these Epicurean communities, Philodemus in particular. And he's thinking about this as an opening of the heart because it's the way that community operates. It's the way that collectives are formed. It's not the massive reformation or revolution, but instead the micro ways within which we can live together. But it takes trust, it takes openness, and it's that opening of the heart to your spiritual director in the Philodemian context, but also to each other. In order to be in community, you have to have this Parisiastic willingness to be open. I met so many people through their intense generosity in the Bibliothèque Nationale. I met Sandra Boulanger in the Salle des Manuscrits. And she was reading this letter on Paul Vane. Paul Vane wrote to Daniel Defer right after his passing. And Sandra, who I'd never met before, she comes over and she says, in French, with our masks on, it's 2021. She's like, I'm so sorry. I just think that, I think you're working on Foucault. I have to share this with someone. And it was this letter that Paul Vane writes to Daniel Defer saying, I can't even imagine your loss, right? You truly were the love of his life. And so then I was sitting there in the archives crying, we're both crying for two dead men. Well, Foucault and then Vane. This is what it felt like to be a part of that opening of the heart. And you so long welcomed me into the BNF, but every single one of you have been so kind. You have shown me, you've modeled for me the kind of exemplarity that I've seen theorized over the last couple of days. You've also given me more hope, sorry, Bika, that we do know what we can do. And we do know that it starts here, and it starts with collectives, and it starts with wherever it is you're coming from and going back to. And so sincerely, in that Parisiastic opening of the heart, I thank you all for being in this community, shaping it together, and really making this not only a momentous, official, scholarly moment, but something that I think can help change our little worlds. And as we change those norms and practices, we can apply pressure to make them on other levels, in other domains, in other ways. So thank you all for being in this together.